Park Service will look at it as part of this greater collection of buildings. And you may have to go to your neighbors and get them to buy in to be listed as well. And there could be difficulties with that.
You have to go to the Landmark Commission too as well, right? And there's certain criteria for that.
I'm sorry?
The State Landmark Commission you have to go to as well to get a building landmark?
Well, it's based on the National Register for all the credits.
So there's no state requirements as well?
I don't know. Doug, is there a difference between state and federal?
Well, the National Register process goes through the State Historic Preservation Office, so yeah, you sort of need their buy-in and their support.
Oh, ultimately.
The eligibility of the property.
Does that answer? I mean, you'll end up...
Yeah, I mean, they have to approve it. There has to be something historical about the building.
Oh, right.
Right, there has to be some features that, I mean, typically old abandoned factories are not necessarily.
They're usually very good candidates to be considered historic, because their previous existence is part of American fabric, and the Park Service is very sensitive to the fact that some of these were getting destroyed, demoed, and eliminated from our culture. So they're generally almost a slam dunk for approval. The catch is, and Doug can speak to it far more eloquently than I can, but the catch is that they'll want as much of that factory salvaged as possible, meaning that they don't have a lot of flexibility on, as I showed you, if there's 11 buildings and they're all kind of intermixed like a traffic jam, you're not able to say, oh, this one's really not contributing, can we get rid of him? Can this guy go? They'll give you friction on each one of them. That's where Doug comes in spades to help you kind of coach the right package through.
Maybe to explain a little bit more what Doug does and just how we all would work together with someone like Doug, who is an historic consultant. So he does the applications, he does the forms, the part 2, he submits, he understands the culture of the Massachusetts Historic Commission, which is very competitive. They're not easy all the time, so Doug deals with that. Barry does the drawings, the architects of plans, and he works with Doug and the developer. And VJ puts this all together and implements it for the developer using Barry's drawings. And both of them already understand from experience what they expect from a consultant in the Historic Commission. And then the Cherrytree Group and someone like our tax credit consultants, we typically don't really syndicate or monetize these credits to the end, but we structure it from the beginning. So it's recommended that we come in the beginning to structure this, to understand what everyone's ideas are, and to turn that into funding, if possible, to help move it along.
Good.
Did I explain it? So I have a question for you. VJ, you know this one's coming for you because I think you literally tortured me when we walked through sites. I'm not the biggest fan of, but when is it that when you see a building, because I mean, you know that I walked into a building with you and I just thought it was going to collapse in us, and you see this amazing structure. When is it that you finally say, like, what is the idea that you say that, okay, we can't save this building? Or do you ever say that?
Well, the answer to you is I don't ever say it,
Yeah.
because I don't have to say it. Usually the dollar sign says it.
Yeah.
So we'll look over the project, and you're right, I have given you some real terrors in our coexistence. I apologize. I knew I was going to be victimized.
Yep.
At any rate, as we're walking it, we'll recognize where a masonry portion of the wall is really suspect. Well, I factor that in. I take some photos as I'm walking it, and I factor that into my budget, and I pad it for what I'm going to have to do to stabilize that. I'll pad my steel numbers in order to stabilize, edifices and facades. Sometimes it gets to a point where they keep on going bigger and bigger, and the client says, I can't afford that. So that's when we come up with other alternatives that might require selective demolition of an entire section of a building and a review of it, which is another great example of why I like being on board with the pre-construction phase. Even if I am going to credit the money back, I've been able to coach the process along so that value engineering options and other ideas are incorporated into the final design, not after the final design, and then we kind of Band-Aid on these suggestions and solutions. We've incorporated it into the design as it's been, progressing.
Barry, I have a question for you, Tim.
Yeah.
Yours won't be as like, why did you do this to me? I know you're innocent to this when you bring me in. You can blame VJ for everything, but so from an architect standpoint, I know it's not as simple as new construction. We've been involved in historic mills where the developer just says, but why can't I just make this into one giant window and like change the outside and change the windows? What is your challenge as an architect to explain that and guide them through? Because it isn't new construction. You have different guidelines that you need to
Adhere to.
Yes.
The Department of the Interior Standards state what they want to see done on a building. And as I'm showing on the exterior, they would love these buildings just to be exactly as they looked in those original photos. But we can't get there. The windows, yes, you can make look the same as they did in the old photographs or the deteriorating pieces that are still existing. It's going in and understanding what those requirements are at the outset, and not so that you're not designing things that are going to get slashed immediately. You want to move forward with an understanding of what will be acceptable, and it's not just understanding the way a window or a door needs to look. It's also understanding who can build that, not just the builder, but the vendors. There's a short list of companies that can build these windows properly and know the process and do it in a timely manner, including the doors. Sometimes existing doorways are not doors anymore. On the inside, they will be, a living room or an office, and if they were solid doors, panel doors to let you put glass in the panels to allow light intact as a window, but from the outside, it still looks like a doorway. We refer to that as door-like openings. You can add some new openings, but you have to be careful about how that is done, and that's all part of the negotiation. And it's a matter of working with the historic consultant and the builder and in our case, Mass Historic Commission here, and say it is negotiation. Please let us do this because we need to do it for these reasons. But look how much we're doing on these other aspects of the project.
Warren, so one of the questions I think we get a lot to us is why bring this in? Because we don't syndicate and monetize the credits until the building's placed in service. So we do realistically come in at the end. But what would you say to developer, architect, or the builder, the team, why we should come into the beginning? What other role do we have other than tax credits into a project?
Thank you. So, like I talked about before, a good example would be if the developer wants to have a structure implemented that saves on taxes, we might have to have a non-profit be part of the structure. Sometimes we will come in and be issuing, we have to come in pre-development. So once these filings have been made with the state and we can verify that a Part 1 and a Part 2 have been filed and certain other due diligence, we're going to issue a term sheet on the state side. That term sheet's indicating that we're going to purchase these tax credits at a certain dollar amount at the time of placed in service, and that would give the developer the ability to take that term sheet to a bank and see if they could get financing against that term sheet, or if they want us to help with that, then the way that it's being structured from a collateral standpoint and things of that nature is important for us to be in. On the federal side, we are actually coming into that ownership structure, and there's two types of structures, whether it's an independent, a direct investment, or it's an indirect investment with a master lease structure, and these get to be quite complicated. And so you also need to have us in at that point pre-construction, because about 20% to a third of our investment is coming in at that time period when that entity is structured, signed off by the lawyers, and we're admitted into that entity. We're making that capital contribution. So we need to be in and working with these guys and checking the QREs and budget and working with the historic consultant from the beginning.
Yes.
I have a question for Barry. At what point along the design process do you involve or contact the Mass Historic Commission?
After you have some design work done and you have some questions on how to proceed on something you want to be doing, the MHC is not a real easy group to deal with. So you have to be very careful how and when you approach them.
Do they give you design feedback of what they will be acceptable and what they think you need to look at more? How does that interaction proceed?
Sometimes. Making contact is the first obstacle, and if you can get response, they will help. I'm sorry to say, it's personality driven, and it's depending on the mood, the day, and Doug, if you have anything wrong, do I have it wrong or right?
You're absolutely right. Unfortunately, it's not very user-friendly in that regard, and we typically don't provide any feedback until you're at a point where you're ready to submit a formal application.
But ultimately, the goal is they approve that application for consideration for historical designation?
Yeah.
Right.
We need their approval.
So, yeah, we need their approval.
Yeah, you've submitted a part one, which is describing the significance of the building and why it does qualify. It's an explanation sheet. The part two is what you're proposing. It's your plans, the drawings, and descriptions on the changes you're making to the building. And then you go do that, and ultimately part three at the end of construction is when they come back, in a sense, to verify what you have done, so that to say, yes, okay, the credits can go through.
Yes.
Do they put preservation restrictions on the property after the 5-year period, or after it's complete?
Can they put it on?
Yeah, I mean, if you're getting funding, there's another funding source for rehabilitation, that once you use it, they automatically put the historic preservation on your deed. Does that happen when you use it?
I'm not actually aware of that. You know anything more about that?
Once your 5 years expire,
Yeah.
you're basically free.
For this first-
property.
For those particular credits.
Yeah.
And just to add on that, on the part two, the other thing that is put in is that QRE budget.
Yes, that's all
So,
part of it.
so essentially, the procedure at that part two, the filing is that the tax credits can be sized based on what those QREs are. The risk we're taking is that you go ahead and then you bill it, and those are actually the costs that you incur. So it could be less, it could be more, and that's what that part three actually at that later stage will be confirming. But our agreements will all have I'm blanking on the word, but we could size the credits up and down, but it's based on that budget that comes in at that stage.
We'll do a conservative estimate based on budgeting where we need to. So
But
we,
one
go ahead.
thing, if your costs increase during construction, you can submit for added credits value based on that increase as well. You have to resubmit the budget, the numbers.
VJ, one of the, since I've worked with you, is that one of the things that you've done is you recycled material from the building to use it into construction. You talked about wood, demo and using that. Can you talk more about that and how you factor all that into your budgeting?
Well, generally, it doesn't get into the construction budget, the analysis that we do in pre-construction, but while we're engaged on a project, it's not unusual at all for us to harvest materials that are there that either the owners want to reuse. We had one client where we harvest his wood flooring, then put down the gypcrete concrete subfloor. And gypcrete, by the way, is necessary for sound attenuation purposes. It keeps anybody who's been in one of these old mill buildings, in my office is a classic example of it. The high heels resonate on the floor below, like it's like thundering in your ears. So we put the gypcrete down. That takes care of the sound, and then he had us relay the harvested wood floor on the top of it again. Barry touched on other elements too. When we have historic elements that are from these old manufacturings, these woolen mills, and have the gears and the mechanisms that operate the machinery, those things are phenomenal. So we like to keep those things intact. Sometimes we'll have to remove them, clean them up, fix them, make them stable, de-lead them, get the paint off of them, clean them up, put them back up again, and they're spectacular contributors. A lot of times we'll even create museums in the space because there's so many artifacts of the manufacturing plant that deserve a home to still live in, and the community still loves this. In fact, a lot of the people that were working in there, in these mills, still reside within easy distance of the mill, and they'll come in and it's just like old home week when they come through. So.
Or people who have spent decades working in these buildings will rent a unit and live in the same building. There is that much emotion involved with these structures.
Yes.
With regards to the solar ITC, are any of you aware of limitations of installing solar panels, whether it be on the building or on site, with regards to review by the Massachusetts Historical Commission or the National Park Service, with regards to no adverse condition or no adverse reaction?
They've gotten much better than they have been over the last number of years. There was a time when you couldn't do it.
Combination of the solar panels too.
Right. How high, the lower they are, the much more acceptable.
Back in, when they first started on the solar panels, they were projecting out 45 degrees and they were visible from everywhere. Now they're low profile.
You should be able to see them, from my understanding, when you're looking at the building. They do need to be hidden, so I think a ground mount would be more appropriate depending on the sizing and how much energy you need.
They like these roofs, these manufactured buildings roofs are ideal for it, especially if they're, as Melina alludes to, like 4 stories or greater, because now your setback is enough so that you can't see it from the street. Low profile, keep it back from the roof edge by 5 feet, 10 feet, whatever the requirement ends up being in order to make sure you can't see from the street.
What about a visual connection from an adjacent roadway? For example, I have a project I'm working on in Chicopee where it's an old cotton mill, and the mill actually is directly adjacent to the interstate. And it's a 6-story building. You can see the roof from that interstate. So my concern is if we go ahead and install solar panels on the roof, you won't see it from the ground, but you will see it from the interstate.
I don't think we'll get any problem at all on that, particularly since when that mill building was built, they're being as fastidious as they are trying to be. There was no interstate there, so it's not fair to say like, well, there's a high rise now right next door that can look down on the roof of the building, so you don't have the flexibility on that roof that you would have if that high rise wasn't there. That's not entirely reasonable. Doesn't mean that you're not going to run into that peculiar entity that's going to give you some pushback, but as a rule of thumb, you should be, so long as you're from the street, you're invisible.
Is it a flat roof that you have?
No, it's probably like a 2-inch ball pitch,
Okay.
so pretty close.
Buildings with sawtooth skylights on them are ideal for these, because very often the sawtooth, the glass faces north, which means the slope is facing south. So basically, you want to put the panel anyway. And, the angle is just right, and you don't really pick it up on it. So,
You used to have this.
yeah. Well,
Used to.
then there's an argument to put them back.
Yes.
I had a quick follow-up question. If you can't install the solar panels, what about the electrical with the shut-offs and the inverters at ground level? Do you have to hide those or put some sort of an architectural feature so it falls into the building?
You gotta be careful with where you locate that equipment.
Right.
It has to get mounted somewhere, so you have an argument. But again, that's part of the proposal, submission, and negotiation on how that gets done.
I think it's, yes.
Yeah, I don't know if this is relevant or not, but if you're an owner and you have a bill that's landmarked on the federal registry, and you neglect it, I mean, there's certain requirements you have to do to keep the building up, and at what point can you just demolish it, or can you?
You can demolish a building that's on the National Register.
You can?
They'll be weeping in gnashing of teeth, but you can do it. It's your property.
So you can do what you want with the building?
Yes, and you can also have it removed from the National Register. For example, my home is on the National Register of Historic Places, and if I decided to start, re-siding the thing, and it's all clapboard sided, and I decided I wanted to have faux brick or something on it, and I did that, they can remove me from the National Register. It can be dequalified as a historic structure.
So there's no preservation?
I'm not collecting any money from them, so they don't have any monetary teeth on me.
So there's no preservation requirements for you to do?
No, just moral.
There may be a demolition delay law where you are, it could be up to a year or more that would hold it up, the process.
The brownfields tax credits, will they typically allow for building components like asbestos to be eligible costs?
The way we work rule of thumb, there's an RTN, and if you can show the asbestos came from the ground, it can't just be ground like in the wall contamination in the building. So
It's not in and of itself eligible. The brownfields credit is for the subsurface costs, the soil and groundwater. But if there's a way that you can piggyback that onto an existing, when Melina mentioned an RTN, if there's a release that needs to be reported to DEP, they'll generate this RTN. If you have that, and then you can demonstrate that the mitigation for the asbestos was necessary. So, for instance, maybe you were cleaning out or demolishing, and there was air quality issues, and you watch out for that. And then we could include it, but we need to have a basis for it.
it's important, we worked with Ed, who just asked a question, and we've worked with, he's an LSP, and we're worked with him to come up with creative ways to tie everything in together to get the brownfields tax credit. So like Warren said, there are ways, but we couldn't just do if it's just in the building. There needs to be some sort of ground contamination.
Do you want to weigh in on that, Ed?
If you are doing abatement of the asbestos, and you test the soil, and there is asbestos in the soil, then that, you can get that notified to the DEP, then you have your RTN, and you can clean it up. You can get your tax credit for that, for the brownfields.
Yes.
Yes, this question is for Barry. Have you encountered a historic building that the building footprint, if it were to be for housing purposes, that you have a double motor corridor and you are to require to have, let's say, 2 bedrooms, that the back bedroom does not have light and ventilation, and that you have to use mechanical,
All the time.
electrical.
All the time.
Is that
But these mill buildings are generally very deep, and so you end up with long, narrow plans. You can have, a buried bedroom. It has to have access to at least borrowed light from an adjacent room, so you can put a transom window up high, and it's a minimum of 25 square feet or percentage of the floor area. You have to have the ability to put air in there as well, but you can your bedrooms do not have to be up against the exterior wall.
Have you visited those spaces and they feel comfortable?
I'm sorry?
Have you visited a bedroom that is way in the back, that doesn't have the natural ventilation that feels adequate, you know, like?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah?
Yeah, we do, the project I was showing you was full
It
of
does
this.
have that?
Yeah.
A lot of times what we'll do is we'll put those in the loft style apartments. The room that's close to the exterior wall, against all the natural light, is your common area, your living area, your kitchen area. That's getting the most use, the most sexy space. You're getting all that light. So your bedroom ends up being in the loft, up above that, which, as Barry alludes to, so long as you're leaving the top gap so that it can steal the borrow light from that room, it doesn't even need to have glass. It can be wide open. Yes. We've constructed it that way quite often.
Okay, yeah, because a loft makes sense if it's a one bedroom, but if you have two bedroom or three bedroom, then, you know, there's the issue of privacy and so forth. I was just curious.
Right.
But they do feel.
Right, you can get the, so if the transom is up high, you have visual privacy, and you can glaze that, though it has to be operable, to get acoustic privacy as well. You know, and glass in the door going into the room also qualifies, any, glazing.
And bear in mind, these floor to ceiling heights are sometimes 14 feet, 16 feet up. So you can have a partition that's 8 feet up, so you've got your privacy, and you have plenty of space above it in order to get air and light circulation.
I think that's all the time that we have, and I just want to mention, I know BJ and Barry are always willing to walk any historic building that you have if you want their input. Well, I need to see pictures first, and I need to know that all the floors and walls and everything's there. But they're definitely willing to do that. And I know the Cherrytree Group, and I would much prefer to review your tax credits than go through some of these sites. But I'll do it if necessary to get some funding. But we work on a pure success fee for your tax credits, so it's an added bonus to, help with structuring, and we love working with these guys, and I think we've done a lot of great buildings, as you can see. We look forward to continuing relationship, and we definitely look forward to helping any of you in the audience, any person member of this team, to help with any of your historic renovations. You can contact us. All of our contact information is right there. We have business cards and everything up here if anyone else has any questions. So I just want to thank you for coming out, and I want to thank our panelists.